Life is a series of building, testing, changing, and iterating. That's according to Lauren Mosenthal. Good day, everyone. This is Sir Jeff, and you are now in EDUC 106 class. For today's session, we shall have a discussion regarding test construction. How do we construct test items, and what are these different types of both the objective and non-objective types of testing? Now, in this session, our chapter intended learning outcome will be to construct a valid classroom assessment test for measuring target learning outcomes. So particularly for this session, you will be able to produce, okay, to craft, okay, to devise, to construct a test which will be used for assessment. So last week, we just had our activity, our session in writing the table of specification. Now for this day, you are going to write down, okay, from the blueprint, you are going to write down the exact assessment to be used based on the table of specification that we have crafted in our previous session. So our chapter ILO, or intended learning outcome, will be to select and construct appropriate test items and tasks for classroom assessment. So this will be instrumental for us to achieve our section ILO, and that is to construct a valid classroom assessment. So it is real to say that assessment is a human activity, and therefore it has to be ethical. And that's what we have learned in our previous session. Okay, this assessment has short-term and long-term effects to the learners. And that's the reason why we need to be careful. That's the reason why we need to be fair, okay, and to be ethical, of course, when we conduct our test. Now, in constructing our assessment, let us make sure that we follow certain guidelines, okay, just to make sure also that the test items are comprehensible, okay, the test items are really constructed in a way that they will be understood and they will be comprehended very well by our learners. So with this learning outcomes, our session topic will be selecting and constructing test items and tasks, and that is still under the chapter topic, development of tools for classroom-based assessment. Now, following that topic, we shall have this session outline. So we shall discuss categorizing test types. So in here, we are going to differentiate, we're going to enumerate the different categories or classifications of tests. And we are going to relate also the test types with the levels of learning outcomes. Next, we shall discuss constructing objective supply type of items, in which we are going to have specific examples, okay, to critique, okay, and to study. After this one, we shall also discuss about constructing non-objective supply type of test. And lastly, constructing selected response type of test. And these are the references that I used for this session. So let's begin with categorizing test types. Now on your screen, I would like you to study the different classification of tests, and they are grouped according to categories. So under category A, we have the completion type. Under category B, we have binary choice and the others. Under category C, we have paper, pencil, and the others. Now let us make a difference. Okay, let us draw the line among these three categories. So for the first one, we have the completion type, short answer, essay restricted type, and essay extended type. What do they have in common? Okay, you could observe that under this, the learners need to provide the answers coming from their own. There are no choices, unlike in category B for binary choice. So example for this is true or false for binary choice. For multiple choice, we also have option. For matching type, we also have option. So for category B, we could say that learners have the choices, okay, have the choice, okay, in front of them, and they could answer even without knowing what's the correct answer really, or even without knowing what's the answer. Okay, that's under category B. While for category C, we have the paper pencil, just like they are asked to produce an output using paper, pencil, or pen, Okay, the pencil here represents anything that we could use for writing, for drawing. Okay, we also have the identification type, the simulated performance type, and we also have the work sample or producing an output. So we could say that under these different categories, we could assess learners in different methods. Okay, first, under category A, we could assess them by asking directly what they know, and it will come from them, and we do not provide options. Okay, well, for category B, we provide options, we provide choices. Okay, for this group of learners who are taking the assessment to choose from. Okay, while on the last category, it's about applying what they have learned and producing something. Okay, that's why we come up with these different types. So under the first category, that's category A, we call this types of tests as the supply type. So I repeat, learners have to provide answers from their own understanding, their own knowledge, and there are no options or choices. While for category B, that's the selection type. We have binary choice, multiple choice, and matching type. We have options, definitely. We have options, and learners, therefore, have to choose from the list of choices. While for the last type, the performance type, like paper, pencil, identification, simulated performance, and work sample. So learners have to apply either in action or in output what they have learned. Now, upon learning these different categories, we should bear in mind that these three types of tests have their own advantages and disadvantages. Okay, so we could use one particular type, one specific type of test, depending on the need, depending on the demand of the situation. Definitely, if your goal, for instance, is to uh, test the understanding, test the fact recall of the learner. So we could use the supply type of test. But if your competency requires the learner to manifest some skill, to produce an output, so we should use the performance type of assessment. Okay, for basic recall, for comprehension, for targeting higher, both the lower and higher order thinking skills, we can use also the selection type. Okay, the selection type of test aside from the performance type of test. And of course, um, there should be this what we call alignment. Okay, alignment with the competency, with the intended learning outcome, and the type of test which we are going to use. So what I'm saying is that if your competency requires the learner to write a paragraph, definitely you're not going to use a supply type of test because that competency connotes that the learners need to produce an output, need to perform. So we could use a performance type of assessment. So those are the three categories. Okay, the three categories of tests, the three different test types. So we have supply type, selection type, and the performance type of test. Next subtopic, relating test types with levels of learning outcomes. So we should remember that we need to align test types with the levels of learning outcomes, such as the knowledge, the skills, the processes, understanding, the product, and the affect. The affect refers to the attitudes and values. So this is the affective side of learning. I repeat, there is an importance, okay? There is value. It is significant to relate always the test types with the learning outcomes, okay, with the levels of learning outcomes, okay. This is to make sure that we are assessing what is intended to be assessed. Now, still on relating test types with levels of learning outcomes, we have here a way, okay, to measure the knowledge and simple understanding. Talking about the different levels of knowledge, we have declarative and procedural. Now, for declarative, it's simply about fact recall, while for procedural, it is about applying what you have learned and, of course, manifesting some skills. So, under the knowledge level, okay, declarative aspect, your task could be about requiring your learners to remember, to restate, to define, to identify, to recognize, okay, to name, to reproduce something, to reselect or select specific facts, concepts, principles, rules, or theories. That's according to the declarative side. Now, for that knowledge level, and you want to make it procedural, Okay, you want to level up to the procedural aspect, it could be done as follows. You ask your learners to remember, to restate, to define, to identify, to recognize, to name, to reproduce, to select correct procedures, steps, skills, or categories. So knowledge here is the lowest and simplest level in the cognitive taxonomies according to Anderson and Krathwohl. Okay, and knowledge and simple understanding make up the early stage of understanding. So this is the basic one. It's because everything that we have learned from lower order thinking skills moving to higher order thinking skills, they all began with remembering. They all began with recalling. Okay, so this is the base. Okay, this is the basic level of knowledge that we need to acquire. While for simple understanding and application under declarative type of assessing, you could ask your learners to use existing knowledge of concepts, principles, and theories in new situations to solve problems, interpret information, and construct responses. Well, on the procedural type of assessment, you could ask the learners the same, but in terms of asking about the difference in how we do it in the procedural type of assessment, you may ask your, aside from interpreting information, you may ask also your learners to construct responses, similar to the declarative side. Now, on the slide, okay, you can see is the table showing the levels of declarative and procedural knowledge. This is just to make sure that you are aware of the different levels of knowledge which we measure every time we assess. Okay, every time we make tests. Okay, at least we know how to classify whether the item is something relating to declarative type of knowledge or the procedural type of knowledge. Now, you study the table which refers to the categories of lower order thinking skills. Okay, and of course, on the other side, the sample generic question. So, talking about knowledge, okay, if your goal is to test about the knowledge of the learners in terms of terminologies, example question is, of course, what is a blank? Okay, what is matter? What is science? So this is simply testing the knowledge on terminologies. While for the second one, knowledge of specific facts, we could have this question: when did blank happen? Talking about a specific date. Okay, knowledge of conventions. Okay, possible question would be what are blank? Where are blank usually found? So this is about location. Next, knowledge of trends and sequences. Name the stages in blank. Okay, knowledge of classification and categories. Which blank does not belong with the others? Knowledge of criteria. We have the example. By what criterion will you use to judge? Knowledge of methods, principles, techniques. When blank increases, what happens to blank? Okay, you could also give the answer to the first blank in order for your learners to have an idea what are you referring to for this particular type of question. For comprehension, what do you mean by the expression blank? Okay, for simple interpretation, what makes blank interesting? What makes the story interesting? Solving numerical problems, use the data above to find the answer to the equation. Okay, manipulating symbols and equations show that blank equals blank. So this relates, I think, to mathematics. Now, our lesson here is that if we target to measure the specific knowledge and these different categories and the lower order thinking skills, make sure that the type of question that we are constructing relate with what we are targeting. So hindi lang tayo yung bato ng tanong. Okay, in our mind, there should be a science. Okay, what should I be asking? What should I be testing today? Am I testing the lower order thinking skills or the higher order thinking skills? Is there a balance between the two? Did I target both? Or am I just asking questions about the lots? And I ignored the hots. Or did I start questioning using the hots and never did I question about dots? These are things that we need to consider when we ask questions, when we assess our learners, when we ask them to take tests. Okay, it's always a balance on everything. And I repeat, if you target about comprehension, okay, in the lower order thinking scales, then the type of question which you are going to give should be about comprehension. Now, beyond knowledge and simple understanding level comes deep understanding, which requires more complex thinking processes. So, when we talk about deep understanding, it's above the lower order thinking skills. Now, you would see on the next slide Now, you would see on this slide what we mean by the lower order thinking skills and the higher order thinking skills. So, obviously, you would see on the last column under deep understanding, these are levels, okay, relating to the higher order thinking skills. So, the table shows how the continuum is harnessed in aligning the cognitive levels to the learning outcomes with sample behaviors for each level. So, you could see, like, after level one, remembering, we have examples like recall, recognize, name, describe. And this will be actually, these words could serve as your guide in testing or identifying whether your objective is on level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5, or level 6. And I repeat, in consequence, this will serve as your guide in drafting or constructing your assessment. So knowledge and simple understanding involve the first three cognitive levels. As you can see, we have level one, remembering, level two, comprehending, and level three, applying, referring to the lower order thinking skills. While deep understanding, or the HOTS, okay, requires three higher cognitive skills. And these are on your screen: level four, analyzing, level five, evaluating, and level six, creating. So aside from classification of higher order thinking skills and lower order thinking skills, on top you would see the categories. Okay, talking about the levels of learning outcomes. So for knowledge, it's level one, remembering. For knowledge, understanding, continuum, okay, or simple understanding, it could be level two, comprehending, or level three, applying. For deep understanding, we have levels four up to level six. I repeat, these are important. We are studying this again. I am presenting it again in order for you to understand better what are we measuring. So this is not only about constructing the test item. We write and write and write and write and write without knowing our basis. Okay? I repeat, the science of constructing test items requires the test constructor to be skilled, to be knowledgeable about the principles, about the concepts that they need to consider when drafting or creating the test items. Now, still on the same subtopic, relating test types with levels of learning outcomes, okay, alignment of learning outcomes to test types, we have here another table. The table illustrates the relationship between learning outcomes. Okay, on top you would see the previously shown table about the levels of knowledge, and of course the classification under knowledge, knowledge understanding continuum, and deep understanding, or the first three referring to lots and the other three referring to hot. So this table illustrates the relationship between learning outcomes and test types. Okay, test types can be made flexible. I repeat, it can be flexible. It's because we are not limited or exclusive to only one cognitive level. Okay, so test types can be flexible and versatile depending on the different levels of outcomes you are measuring. Like for supply type, as you can see here, the supply type on your screen could be used both in lots and HOTS. Okay, supply type could be present from knowledge, okay, knowledge understanding, and deep understanding. On your screen, it could be the completion type of test, the short answer. Okay, while for the supply type, deep understanding, the higher order thinking skills, it's the essay type of test. But still under supply type because the learners have to provide answers. So it could be essay restrictive or essay extended. So when we say essay restrictive, in here, we limit the possible answer coming from our learners. Like if you would ask, you state the principles of something, the principles that you believe, the principles stated during our discussion. You state the steps in cooking. That's essay restricted because answer will be limited. Okay, while for essay extended, it's broad. Okay, it's very broad in terms of scope. Okay, usually when we ask opinions, when we ask the reaction of our learner, and then it should be as a extended type of test. But if you are limiting something like using 3 to 5 sentences, in that case that's essay restrictive in terms of length. Okay, in terms of length only, but the answer could be extended in a way that you would require them to state their opinion. Okay, so in one examination to analyze, no, in one type of test, essay type of test, it could be a combination of both restrictive and essay extended. Restrictive in a way that you limit the number of sentences, extended in a way that you let them answer based from their opinion. But it could also be purely essay restrictive or purely essay extended, such as for essay restrictive in TLE. when you ask them to recall the steps in cooking adobo, for instance. So they will write in essay format and they have to sequence the steps. And it's restricted because it's not opinionated. Okay, they need to follow the exact step in cooking adobo. Okay, that's for the supply type. Okay, according to the article you have read, for example, relating to lots, okay, talking about the essay, what factors contribute to climate change? Asking about the factors that contributed to climate change. That's for lots. Okay. While for it could also be a enumeration in a way, no? It could also be enumeration, providing a short answer based from the question. Well, for HOTS, okay, it could be write an article on how the government and the community can work together to mitigate the factors causing environmental change. So in here, you are asking them to produce an output. So for deep understanding, you use the performance task type, okay, because they need to write an article. They need to produce a work sample, a written output. Okay, I repeat, on your screen, you would see that in different levels of knowledge, different categories, okay, whether lower order or higher order thinking skills, we have specific and appropriate test types to be used. Okay, for knowledge, I repeat, supply or selection type. For knowledge, understanding, continuum, or simple understanding, it could be also supply type or selection type. While for deep understanding, all three could be used. All types of tests could be used for higher order thinking skills. But of course, with specific subtype, like for the supply type, for HOTS, it's about essay, restrictive, and essay extended. We cannot use the completion or short answer type for deep understanding. For selection type, it could be multiple choice, but of course, the options, the choices which you are going to give will be about critical thinking, higher order thinking skills, of course. It's not simply fact recall, like who is our national hero, letter A. Okay, you have Emilio Aguinaldo, letter B, Andres Bonifacio, letter C, Jose Rizal. That could not be classified as deep understanding even if it's multiple choice because it's about recall. It's about recalling, recognizing names. It's about remembering. So that's under a knowledge selection type, multiple choice type of test. Okay. So we need to note that questions could be used as an elicitation device. That is why constructing test items and item elements are both crucial for supply type in order to assess both lots and HOTS. Okay? Our goal inside the classroom is not only to teach. Okay, we need to measure, we need to gauge, and the basic tool that we use is through questioning in order to elicit, okay, to elicit learning, elicit understanding, elicit knowledge from our learners. Still on relating test types with levels of learning outcomes, we have the complex thinking skills. Okay, on your screen, you would see the different types of thought questions and the sample item stems. So when say item stems, we are talking about the possible test item, okay, assessment item that we could use targeting the particular type of thought question cited on the first column. So in here, as presented by Miller, Lane, and Grunbaum in 2009, we have the categories of thought questions for deep understanding and the sample items, as you can see on the table. So these sample stems can be used in constructing test types both for supply and selection type that can elicit complex thinking skills. So these are examples of supply and selected type that can elicit higher order thinking skills. So for comparing, you may ask the question, describe the similarities and differences between. Okay, that's comparison. Compare the following two methods for relating cause and effect. What are the major causes of? What would most likely be the effect of? Justifying which of the following alternatives would you favor and why? Explain why you agree or disagree with the following statement. For summarizing, state the main points included in. Briefly summarize the contents of. For generalizing, we have formulate several generalizations from the following data. State a set of principles that can explain the following issue. For inferring, in light of the facts presented, what is most likely to happen when? Okay, another, how would Senator X be likely to react to the following events? So it's about making predictions, okay, on what will be the reaction based, of course, on the reaction or situation. Let's say, for instance, the senator had made several actions before prior to the event, okay, based on those evidence. Okay, those pieces of evidence that you have gathered, okay, historically talking, okay, talking about the background of the senator, how would he react? So it's about reading the reaction of people based on their previous actions. So these types of thought questions are usually for essay types, either restricted or extended. We have another example here. So still about the types of thought questions, the other types of thought questions, which could be used for essay type of test, either restricted or extended, for explaining why did the candle go out shortly after it was covered by char. So this relates to science. Explain what the president meant when he said, the buck stops with me. Okay, persuading. Write a letter to the principal to get approval for a class field trip to state capital. So aside from essay type of test, this could also serve as a performance type of test because you need to produce a letter and output, a written output. Another for persuading, why should the student newspaper be allowed to decide what should be printed without prior approval from teachers? Okay, classifying, group the following items according to what do the following items have in common? Creating, list as many ways as you can think of for. Okay, make a story describing what would happen if. That's creating. Applying a principle, using the principle of a blank as a guide, describe how would you solve the following problem situation. Another example, describe a situation that illustrates the principle of. Again, our lesson here, okay, not only basing from our own understanding, when we write our assessment, okay, the table is a reflection that we always need to relate the test types with the levels of learning outcomes. So if you ask them to persuade, that's the level of learning outcome, then the sample test item should match that. They should be explaining. Okay? That when they read the question, when they answer the question, the output will be about explanation. If you ask them to persuade, then it should show in the question. You ask them to persuade. A lot of teachers fail on this part. It's because they are assessing something which they did not target. So if you stated in your objective that they have to persuade, they have to classify, then in your assessment, ask them to classify, ask them to persuade. Do not ask them to do something else. Now, on top, okay, on your slide, you can see examples of performance assessment tasks for advanced level. Okay, in here, we have the thinking skill analyze, evaluate, and create. Under the performance task, okay, for analysis, you may ask, okay, by the way, these are just examples, okay? These are specific examples, and this does not mean that the examples, the possible performance tasks could be used for analysis will be limited to this examples listed on your screen. So first, you could ask them to write analytic memos, like writing one or a two-page analysis of a specific problem or issue. Number two, ask them to complete the pros and cons grid, making a list of pros and cons of a decision made. Okay, like knowing the strengths, okay, the weaknesses, the possible threats. Okay, it's like SWOT analysis. Okay, content, form, and function outline, in which you ask your learners to analyze the what, how, and why of the particular message of an advertisement or commercial. Next, we have evaluate thinking skill. Okay, you may use the Maria's point, like identifying what students find least clear in lesson story or demonstration. So it's like stating what do you not understand from the session? What's not clear about the session? Okay, that's what we call the Maria's point technique. The misconception check, or assessing the student's prior beliefs that can hinder learning. Another, we have the empty outline, recalling and organizing the important points of a lecture of reading. That's for the evaluation thinking skill. While for the creating thinking skill, we have the application cards. Okay, this is about designing an application of a learned scientific principle or procedure in real word. Okay, another, we have directed paraphrasing. This talks about translating what has been learned in one's own words or form for a specific audience. So it could be, for instance, a message, okay, that they have learned from the story. They translate that in their own words, okay, using their own interpretation, depending on who will be the audience. Like, of course, if it's about the class, they just simply state the message. Okay, there could be other forms, like you ask them to make an interpretative dance or produce an output out of the message that they have learned from the story. And of course, lastly, the paper or project perspectives. In here, you ask the learners to write the first structured draft, okay, of a paper or a project that is creating in preparation to their plan. Okay, their plan for producing a good output. So this is actually what I do when I ask my learners to produce an output. I ask them first to make a draft inside the classroom, and then from the plan, from their blueprint, okay, there will be this what we call either suggestion to improve. Okay, the harsh word reject, but of course we do not use the word reject in front of our learners, or the acceptance of the proposal to make sure that they will be creating, okay, an output which is reliable. So we will not be wasting resources.